Production funding for this program is made possible in part by the WKNO Production Fund, the WKNO Endowment Fund, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
Hi, and welcome to A Conversation with Art Gilliam. I'm your host, Tom Prestigiacomo, but our guest is a legend in Memphis radio, and he's done incredible things throughout his life, and that's what we're going to get to talk about today. Art, thank you for being with us.
Tom, thanks for inviting me. I'm happy to be here.
All right, let's see if I can remember everything. Born March 6, 1943.
That is correct.
In Nashville.
Nashville, Tennessee.
Your mom and dad and your mom's mom all moved to Memphis when you were, what, about 3 years?
About 6 years old.
Oh, about 6 years old. And you started school here and then...
Started school here actually in the 4th grade. At that time, they would test you to see what grade you should be in, and my mom had been a teacher herself, and I'd gone to a school that had kind of other teachers who kind of gave you a pre-school information and training, and I tested out in the 4th grade, so I started here at 6 years old in the 4th grade.
Of course, it also helped that your mom was a school teacher, too.
Well, that's what I mean, yeah. She was very, very much instrumental in my learning, a lot of things, English and so many other things, but she was actually an English teacher.
And what did your dad do?
My dad was in the insurance business.
Okay, so and that's not just any insurance business. He was
with Universal Life Insurance Company, and he worked his way up the ranks. So he became a second vice president at Universal Life Insurance Company over the years. We moved to Memphis because he was in insurance in Nashville. Got a promotion to be an assistant agency director in Memphis, and so we moved.
All right, I want to come back to Universal for sure.
Okay.
All right, so you started school in Memphis at what school?
At Hamilton High School.
At Hamilton.
Yeah, in those days it wasn't just high school, it was 12 years.
And then,
but it was, I started at Hamilton in the 4th grade.
And then you transferred out of town. You went to school.
Yeah, I went to Westminster Prep School in Simsbury, Connecticut. That was after what would have been my 10th grade year at Hamilton. So I was at Hamilton most of the time.
Was that unheard of for you?
There were a few people, as far as, in the black community, relatively rare, but there were a couple of role models I had who had done that sort of thing. But just in general, you didn't have as many people going away to prep school. But Tom, at that time, you had segregated schools in Memphis. So the type of education that you could get here in Memphis was not comparable to what you could get in other places. And I think that's what prompted my parents to make the decision to send me out of Memphis to school.
So you left when you were?
I was about 12. Let's see, I was 13 years old.
13 years
yes.
old, and you're off and you're living on campus by yourself.
That's
with
right.
Other students.
Yeah, exactly.
Was that a surprise to you? I mean, were you?
Well, it was. Also, again, I was leaving the South, and so it was quite a surprise because this was a predominantly white school. Predominantly meaning I was the only black person in my class of about 40 or 50 students. So it was a culture shock. I mean, in addition to just the fact of leaving home, period, would be kind of a challenge anyway. But it was a challenge in 2 or 3 different ways.
Did your education process change? Could you tell the difference between what you were learning at Hamilton and how you were taught?
Oh, absolutely, because when I went to Westminster, I actually repeated the 10th grade, not because I had bad grades. I had great grades at Hamilton, but because the things that they were offering were so different from what was offered at Hamilton. So, I could tell the differences.
And were you treated, not just in school, but in and out of school, were you treated differently from Memphis to Connecticut?
Well, the school... I would say that the societies, of course, were much different, and there were differences because when you go to prep school away from regular public school, that's a difference. Right. Going from an all-black school to basically an all-white school, that was a difference. So there were a lot of differences for sure.
And at the ripe age of 16, you enrolled in Yale University.
That's right.
You're a Bulldog.
Sure, yeah.
Talk about that. Tell me what the Yale experience was like.
It was a great experience. I think even looking back on it, I probably appreciate it more than at the time. But going to Yale was a great experience, great school, and met a lot of wonderful people.
Who was in your class? Anybody? Can you name drop?
Jerry Brimmer was one of my classmates. He went over to Iraq, and he was one of the. I think his actual name is. I think it's Andrew Brimmer. We call him Jerry.
Right.
At the time, a couple of news anchors. There. So there were a number of people in our class that became more known.
And so
later.
You graduated from Yale and came back to Memphis.
Yes, eventually I went to the University of Michigan for a master's degree in actuarial science, which is insurance mathematics. I went to.
Your career was set then when you came back.
It really was. My dad was in the insurance business and actuarial work in the insurance business, which is determining mortality and morbidity type rates and
actuarial tables.
Yeah, actuarial tables, exactly. Yeah, it was somewhat set in that way. Of course, I veered off quite a bit after that.
Well, you sure did. But before we leave that, I want to ask you about Universal Life. Talk about its history, not only in Memphis, but what it meant to black business owners.
Oh, absolutely. There were 4 or 5 companies around the country that were black-owned companies. They were insurance companies, and they were really anchors in their communities. And Universal was an anchor in this community. So much of my business background came from being at Universal Life Insurance Company, and I was in the claims department, and I went out on the field and sold insurance. I did a lot of different things as I was growing up. But Universal, along with 4 or 5 other companies, were anchors in their respective communities as far as black businesses are concerned.
And community involvement.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, Universal was involved in, at that time, of course, civil rights very heavily in terms of voting, voter registration. I mean, that was an era of course, when you had quite a lot of activity in the area of civil rights. So Universal was at the core of that.
All right. So you went to Yale, you went to Michigan, you came back to Memphis. What year are you back in Memphis?
Well, I finished Yale in '63, and I came back to Memphis in '64 because I did a split year in Michigan. So I did 1 year at Michigan, and then went back for the second year 2 years later.
So you were still out of town when John F. Kennedy was shot?
Yes, I was. I was at the University of Michigan. We'll never forget that. Kennedy, I was in a lecture in business law at the University of Michigan, big lecture, 300-400 people. And the lecturer who wrote the book we were studying, his name was Gerald Dykstra. That's just something that's very, very vivid for me. And he said, I have some bad news to share with you. And he said, John Kennedy's been killed in Dallas. And he went on with his lecture, but I got up and walked out because, it was just what it meant to me, what Kennedy meant to the black community, to me personally, in terms of just what the aspirations that you had and the hopes you had, and to have that dashed. So, but yeah, I was at the University of Michigan in '63 when Kennedy was killed.
So then you go to Michigan and then you come back.
Yes.
And where were you when Martin Luther King was assassinated? I
was in Memphis at that time, and I actually had seen some of the riot activity and so on that had preceded the assassination. But I was back home, and I was working at Universal Life Insurance Company at that point. In '67, I had finished my degree, my master's at Michigan in actuarial science, came back and started working for the company in that area.
I'm not good at math. How old were you? You're great at math. How old were you?
Well, I'd have to think back about
it. How old were you in '67?
In '67, I was 24.
So when you're 25, then Martin Luther King.
That's right.
Long after you turned 25.
That's absolutely right.
Tell me about Memphis at that time, from your perspective.
Well, it was a segregated city. It was a city where there was a lot of frustration in the black community. It was a city that was ripe for civil rights and for activity, for the kinds of things that Dr. King came here to do. It was a city where it was not surprising that you had the "I am a man" signs and the sanitation workers striking because of what was perceived to be unfair treatment. It was a city where some years previously everything was really very segregated. When I was a youngster, I rode on the back of segregated buses. So this was a city much, much different than the Memphis we know today.
Do you think kids understand that today? When you talk about segregation,
I don't think that either black or white kids have a full perspective on what that was all about. Although a lot of people understand that, there's need for things to change in our society, and there are issues in society. But no, I don't think many have a full understanding of what a segregated society was like.
Right. So what happens to Memphis after things start closing down? Downtown becomes a completely different animal. and you're still at when did you leave the insurance business? Let me ask that.
Well, I left the insurance business in 1974. Harold Ford Sr. Ran for Congress, won, and I left and became a administrative assistant in Washington in his office. So that's when I left the insurance business.
So you only got to stay in Memphis from 1967 to 1974.
That's right.
And then you're off to Washington.
That's right, but I was only there for about a year or two, a year and a half.
What did you do in the year and a half that you were there?
Well, I was there as an administrative assistant and in the office, so I was overseeing the congressional office, in fact, both here and in Washington. So I was involved in the activities of Washington, the legislative activities, and various things that take place in that city.
And you didn't get the political bug at all?
Not at all. No. I can truthfully say I didn't get the political bug.
Is that because you're a numbers man?
Well, I guess you have to determine what your calling is, and my calling was not that, but I found that it was more in the media, and I was very much interested in community, though, and a lot of times, of course, politics has a lot to do with what takes place in the community, but that wasn't the particular way that I was interested in pursuing changes in the community.
But you did give the opportunity for people to learn more about your community through your writings with the Commercial Appeal. You had a
well, that's right.
Columnist?
I was. In fact, that began in 1968, right after Dr. King was killed, and I became a columnist for the Commercial Appeal.
How did you get the job?
I made contact with someone, as I recall it, at the paper and indicated to them that, in my view, they did not have a black point of view in the paper, and that was something that I thought was needed and important in this city. And Frank Algren, who was then the editor of the paper, I guess he agreed with me, but he decided to start that column, and it was a weekly op-ed column.
That's amazing. And that's from 1968 until when? How long did you write that?
I wrote the column until I left as well. So I wrote that column for about 7 years. And in the meantime, the WMC-TV recruited me from the Commercial Appeal. They saw me. They saw my column, and I guess they thought that I was an employee of the Commercial Appeal. So asked me if I was interested in television. So I did some things in television as a weekend anchor.
You were a weekend anchor, right?
I was a weekend anchor, right. I told them I already had a job because I was already in the insurance business.
So Myron Lowry probably you and Myron were both weekend anchors for a good
while.
Well,
yeah, actually, I preceded Myron, and Myron came toward the end of my tenure there, maybe a couple of years before, and we were both anchors at MC during that period.
Did you like the way TV worked? Did you, the fact
I did, in a way. One of the things I found, though, in TV was that when you're on, I mean, you're really on, and then when it's over, you're kind of coming down. So,
right.
So that was, it was a different kind of experience. But I mean, live TV,
right.
Doing it live and doing live news. So I enjoyed it. But later, I actually did editorials and did film pieces, and I enjoyed that actually more so than the live television aspect.
Were you surprised at the response when people saw you on television and then they saw you in person?
Well, the biggest thing was people said, I thought you were shorter than you are. So I guess that's a surprise. I'm about 6'2", so I guess when you're sitting at the news desk,
right.
They can't exactly tell.
Well, they think you fit in that box.
Yeah, I guess that's right, yeah.
And there were no 50-inch screens back then. We were watching little TV tubes.
Well, that's exactly right. But it was an interesting experience, and so one that I will always remember and cherish.
Well, here's the thing, is that you wrote, you're a journalist.
Yes.
You are an anchor.
Yes.
And you go out and buy a radio station.
Well, and it all ties in. I guess the way it ties in is that it ties into the community.
Right.
I was always interested in doing things involving our community, and so the radio to me was an even more effective way of being able to do that, because a lot of people relate to their radio station very personally. So
yes.
You'll hear a person say, "Hey, that's my radio station." They don't necessarily relate to that's my TV station. They may relate to a specific program on TV, but not to the station itself. So in that sense, radio becomes a community medium that people can relate to on an individual level.
Well, we'll get into that in a minute, because you owned WLOK. You were the first black locally owned
yes.
radio station, and the first black locally owned radio station.
That is correct. We were both the first locally owned, first black-owned radio station in Memphis.
And
That's
you
right.
grew up listening to it.
I had, when I was a teenager, I listened to WLOK.
Who were the kids that who were the jocks that you listened to?
Well, there was a fellow named Wild Bill Terrell and another fellow named Wash Allen. Herb the K came a bit later, but a lot of those were announcers, the Wild Child. They had all kinds of names like that. They were characters.
That's what radio was. It's theater of the mind.
That's right, and you're a radio person, so you know.
I have had my experience.
Right,
there.
right.
But I want to talk about, what do you remember about those guys? Did they have regular jokes or bits or things that they did on a regular basis?
Oh yeah, I mean they had, the skits in those days you spun records, and so now it's more mechanical. But and they were there between records and talking, and they had their own shtick, you might say, and so. And they were all, they were all personalities, very, very strong personalities.
Well, when you were growing up, was WLOK in competition with WDIA in the same way that WHBQ and WMPS used to fight it out?
Very good analogy, absolutely, because WHBQ and MPS were pop, top 40 pop type stations, and LOK and DIA black-oriented stations. So yeah, they were very much so.
Do you remember any of the commercials on there? Some of the sponsors that used to do the shows? Anything that jumps out at you?
Nothing that really jumps out as individually as sponsors, but the thing that really stands out more so in radio are the personalities, and they are often doing. I guess the individual endorsements, things. So I remember some of the individual endorsements that used to be. Let's see, though. Let's see. There was a product called Seritan.
Nature, which is
it spells nature's backwards. Yeah, exactly. You remember that too, then.
All too well.
yeah. So that's one that stands up. But there were many. In those days, the announcers, were really promoting the products and that kind of giving individual endorsements.
I use this. You should too.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, there's another. I think it's called Pepticon or something like that.
Pepticon, that's right.
You remember that too?
Yeah, but that's what I would. Because those days are gone in radio.
Yeah.
I mean, there's still endorsements. But let's talk about, all right, let's talk about now, how did you decide that you wanted a radio station?
Well, I had been involved in media because by being in television
and
newspaper, but I saw radio as being an opportunity to influence and have an effect on the community in a different way. So that's what kind of got me interested in radio. I thought it was a good business as far as just a business aspect, but also just that more so, I was motivated even more so by the fact that it affects your community.
It sure does.
And you have the opportunity.
Right. How did you get the station? Well, I can't wait to talk about the Stone Soul Picnic, but tell me how you got from I'm interested to here I go.
Well, I was in Washington at the time that I got interested, and Ben Hooks was the commissioner at the FCC. Dr. Benjamin Hooks, and he was from Memphis, and of course I knew him. Right. And I went over to talk to him. I told him I had some interest in radio, the possibility of getting involved in purchasing a radio station, and so he put me in the right directions, and in fact sent me to a brokerage house that sells stations, and the fellow named Joe Citrick.
And this is what year?
This would be 75, roughly, 75, 76 in there. And I went and talked to the broker, and he said, well, by the way, there's a station for sale in your hometown, which was WLOK. It wasn't known here in Memphis that the station was for sale because naturally the corporate owners
you wouldn't want to know that.
No, you wouldn't tell the people you're going to sell the station. But by going there, I didn't go specifically asking about Memphis. Right. I just went asking about radio in general. And he said, well, in fact, there's a station for sale in your hometown, WLOK. And I said, you got to be kidding. I grew up listening to WLOK. So that's how it began.
And when did you take the keys and go in the door the first time?
It was really, I got the keys and went in the door in February of 77, but we actually closed the deal in 76, which meant that this is our 40th anniversary this year.
So that's pretty good.
Yeah. So it was a good deal. But in those days, you could, because there were restrictions, in terms of radio and television ownership, one company could only own so many radio and TV stations.
6-6-12. It used to be
that's right. Yeah.
6 a.m., 6 FM, and 12 TV.
Yeah, exactly. And so because of that, you had more time to put your financing together.
Right.
So it took me about a year to really put the financing
So
together.
you could make a down payment and take over the station, and then
Well, yeah, actually, what you did is you were really looking for the financing, and you made kind of an agreement, a letter of intent, an agreement to buy, and then you had to go and find the financing. Now, today, you have to have the money to put on the table.
Right.
It's a much different ballgame now, but at that time, you could do that. So I spent a year. Actually, I did not work for a year because I spent my time really putting together the package for
Investors.
yes, talking to investors for WLOK.
all right. Now I'm gonna if you can tell me, I'd love to know what you paid for it in 1977.
$725,000. It's a public record.
Are you amazed?
Yeah, well, yeah, and I mean it
It was a lot of money in 1977.
oh yeah, and when I say I paid for it, I didn't pay for it, but it was part of that was carried, part of it was bank loans, so most of it was loan.
So what was the station like when you walked in? What kind of music were they playing? What were they doing?
Well, they were playing music that was R&B, but the interesting thing, Tom, about it, is somewhat not unlike Memphis at that time. You had a kind of a divide within the station where you had the announcers who were black, I mean, on that side of the station, and then the business area, the sales and so on, were white. So there was kind of a divide even within the station
was it
itself.
hard for salespeople to get people to understand that you had an audience that bought things, that participated, that were in the community?
Well, I think that I think what happens is that the audience, by virtue of going and buying the products, the client then begins to recognize that the audience. But yes, as far as the salesperson having to open up a new account, you might say, to try to explain the value of that audience, because what you're really doing was trying to explain the value of a predominantly black audience, and that many might perceive as not having economic means, or in some instances not necessarily being desirable even. So yeah, there was some persuasion that would take place. But what we did was we made sure that the station that everybody was one. In the radio station, we didn't have a divided station, but that's what I saw when I first got there. It was a divided station.
There's so many. We got about 5 minutes left here, but
Okay.
I want to ask about the Stone Soul Picnic.
Yes.
Whose idea was that, first of all?
Two guys who were announcers. One of them was named Wild Child. He was one of the announcers. And there's a fellow who's here now named David Acey. He wasn't an announcer, but he was involved. A couple of the announcers at WLOK, and this was before about 2 years before we bought the station. They decided they were going to just go out to what was then Riverside Park,
Right.
spin some records, ask Wonder Bread if they give them some buns, and ask King High to give them some wieners, and get some hot dog, Coca-Cola to give them some Cokes. So they went out and they said, I'll get a couple hundred people and we'll just spin some records. And thousands of people showed up.
They took the name off of the Fifth Dimension song.
Yes, the song, Fifth Dimension. That song had a D on it, Stoned.
Stone Soul
Yeah, they
Picnic.
took the D off for good reason. We're thankful for that.
Although
now.
today that's not a problem.
Yeah,
Isn't
right.
it amazing how things change in 40 years?
Yeah.
All right. So what was the underlying community giveaway? It was just a chance to go out and meet the people and have people get there.
Well, really basically what it was, and we still do it today because we still have the Stone Soul Picnic, as you know,
Right. Oh,
today.
yeah.
It's just a thank you for our listeners. And so it's a free event. It's always been a free event. And so we have major entertainment package. It's not a matter of, just spinning records in a park.
People show up.
Right. And we moved it just recently to Levitt Shell. So we have had it the last 2 years in Levitt Shell, and we'll be doing that again in 2017.
And it's almost like an annual class reunion.
It is. It's an annual event. And
people from
great.
Memphis see people again from Memphis.
Well, yeah, and just come out and have a good time, and you can come out and it's free if you bring your own picnic basket if you want to. And so.
I have about 3 minutes more with you. Tell me about Al Green and what he means to you.
Oh, Al Green was one of the very first people that came by. He was the first person I remember coming by WLOK when we bought the station, and just to come by and say, hey, good luck and so on. And of course, from my mind, Al was a hero and a big artist, so it was really very, very positive and impressive to me. And so when we had our 40th anniversary earlier this year, I went to Al and I said, look, would you come and perform at the anniversary? Also, Al was in R&B at the time, and then he transitioned over into gospel, and as we did.
So did you play his records first? I mean,
Oh yeah, we were playing his records. We'd been playing his records all along the station, even before we bought it, and then subsequently, and then We played as a gospel artist, as an R&B artist. So, and he was the featured artist at our 40th anniversary, which we just had recently.
I had a friend from Germany who always went to the Full Gospel Tabernacle Choir.
Oh, yeah.
To hear the choir every Sunday. He was in America, and
Yes.
he was in Memphis. He would come in and see.
Well, it's very popular. I go from time to time over to Full Gospel Tabernacle, which of course is Al Green's church, Bishop Al Green, I should say, and so yeah, and many times I think visitors from the city, to the city, know about Al Green, so they want to go and see the church, and so you always see a lot of visitors.
It's the best 3 hours you will ever spend.
And sometimes only 2. So
talk about the other artists that had an impact on your station, and tell me how you went from R&B to gospel. What made the transition?
Well, in the earlier years, most stations that were black formatted did play a little bit of gospel. So we'd play gospel in the morning with an announcer, James Chambers, who's with us today. And so we decided, as FM became more and more in vogue, we decided, well, we want to do something a little different, and because we could recognize that there was going to be a trend toward FM. So before that really happened, we decided to do some changing of our format. So we changed our nighttime format to gospel. And we were the #1 station in the city at night when we did that. So we kind of figured we were on to something.
Let me ask you about your ratings. Were you ever #1 in the city? What was the best ratings you ever had?
We were. At one point, we were #1 in the city. That was back maybe 2 or 3 years in. I think part of it was the novelty of black ownership and the different, differences, people, feeling good about the fact that we had done that. But yes, but DIA was a hard station to overcome.
They're 50,000 watt, right?
Yeah, that's right. And we're 1,000. So.
Fine. Let me just ask to wrap it up. Were there any companies or businesses that stuck by you, and when you stepped into your ownership and said, "Oh my gosh, I've got a radio station," and you're young, so you're excited, but
sure.
The responsibility of it. Any companies or people who helped you through, or who came in at the beginning?
Well, a number of companies, sure, but none that I would just mention specifically, because they have competitors and their competitors are on the air, so I don't want to give an advantage to a particular company. But there were a number of companies and a number of people. We had a lot of support from the community, because in the end, the companies that are with you are only going to be as strong as your listeners, because you're really in radio delivering a market.
Right.
And so we had a lot of organizations that were very loyal to us and still are today.
It's an honor to talk to you. Thank you so very much.
Tom, thank you.
My guest today has been Art Gilliam of WLOK in Memphis, Tennessee, and the world, and you've been listening to a conversation with him. We'll see you next time here on WKNO.